All right, welcome back. So today we're going to be continuing our notes on chapter 3. And so if I recall, we left off with me talking about the Latin phrase ceteris paribus, right? Which means all else equal. So remember when we went ahead and defined that demand curve, what's on the y-axis? Price. So it's very easy to mix them, right? And so price is on the y-axis and quantities on the x-axis. If we need help, we can always think about the alphabet, right? L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, right? So the P comes before the Q, left to right, okay? And so the other thing that we learned was that our demand curve is always going to be downward sloping, right? Why is the demand curve downward sloping? What happens as things get cheaper? More people will buy them, right? So if the price is up here, there's not going to be that many in terms of, there might be just 2. And if the price is down here, then there's going to be much more purchasing behavior and the price is going to be 7 or something, right? Now, at the end of the day, the demand curves that we're really interested in are what's called market demand curves, right? So how do we get to market demand curves? Well, we start with individual demand curves. So this is Bob's demand curve for lattes, right? So he's got a demand curve that's like this. Then, Jenny, she has a demand curve that might be like this. And so at the end of the day, there's going to be a bunch of these different ones, right? For every, so we take all the individual ones plus individual demand. And what we do is what's it called? So we're used to vertically summing stuff, right? Like 7 plus 2 is equal to 9. This is horizontally summation. So it's taking this curve, adding this curve, and getting a market curve. So let's just quickly do an example. So at the market price of $4, Bob's going to have 5 lattes a week. At the market price of $4 again, Jenny's going to have 1 latte a week. So what is our market demand at $4? It would be 6, right? So it would be, I want to make sure it's properly spaced. It'd be 6. Does that make sense to everybody? That's called a horizontal summation. Okay. So what are the things that changes the demand curve? So there's a list of them, and we will have to know them for the test. So figure 3.3 in the text illustrates these. So it says. So I'll just redo that graph real quick. Figure 3.3. So we've got the price, we've got the quantity. We have some initial demand curve. And again, this is for lattes, where, at 4, the quantity demanded is 4. And at 2, the quantity demanded is 11. if there's an increase in demand, what's going to happen to the demand curve? Is it going to shift to the right or to the left? To the right. Very good. So to the right is the increase in demand. And what happens when we increase the demand? Let's use a different color. When we increase the demand, then at any given price, so what I like to do is I like to hold the price constant, so to speak, right? So at any given price, there's going to be more demand, right? So now we have 11 lattes that are demanded at $4 instead of 4. So let's talk about the things that can cause an increase in demand, and then we'll talk about the things that cause a decrease in demand. I mean, they're all related, but we'll just keep it in terms of things that cause an increase for the moment. So the first one is a favorable change in consumer taste. So this could be that people just figure out that they like coffee, right? But it also could be that a study shows that coffee drinkers every day are at lower risks for a certain type of cancer.
Or it could be our coffee shop started doing special latte.
Right. Well, so that's not so much a market shifter, though, as an individual shifter for the firm.
Okay.
So you could think about, like, there's a new type of latte out there or something, right? You know, like the flat white or whatever, right? You're like,
Bulletproof coffee.
right, exactly. So, but you could almost argue that they're creating a whole new market by doing that, right? And they're trying to have their new coconut infused coffee as a substitute to traditional lattes. Does that make sense? That's a great comment. So let's see here. So we could say, let's go right into, so that's a good segue for the increase, if there's an increase in the price of a substitute good. So what are some of the substitute goods for lattes, right? It would be, you know, teas, energy drinks, sodas, you know, flavored water, infused water, whatever, right? So if any of these and or all of these have an increase in their price, then more people are going to be demanding lattes at any given price, right? So like I said, I like to just kind of plop down my hand or just fix the price. And so I'm looking for things that are going to cause more people to be demanding lattes at any given price. So we could do the same thing at 2, except for the fact that I didn't draw this line long enough, right? So yeah, the increase in price of a substitute good is going to cause the demand to shift out. We've got substitute goods and we have complement goods, right? C is going to be a decrease in the price of a complementary good. Complementary, not I. Compliment with an I is like, you're pretty. That's a compliment. Complement is something that goes along with something else, right? So, you know, a left shoe is a complement to a right shoe. Who just wears one shoe? You know, hot dog buns are a complement to hot dogs. If all of a sudden the price of hot dogs goes through the roof, what happens to the sales of hot dog buns? They plummet because they're complements. You eat hot dogs and hot dog buns together.
So if the government started subsidizing milk sales,
yes.
So we could buy the milk for a lot cheaper.
But so since the milk is a part of a latte, it's not really a complementary good. It's more of a factor of production. So we'll get to that in terms of, oh, well, that's going to be on the supply side, not necessarily the demand side. So this would more be like, they don't really have them anymore, but for a while, those biscottis, they were everywhere, right? When you got coffee, you guys remember that? They were these like long bread-like things that were really crunchy. It was an Italian thing, biscottis. But you could also think of, you know, pastries.
What about the cup? The cup you
Cup's part of the factor of production. So you can't give somebody a latte without a cup. I mean, as you're driving through. So that's a good question. But it's part, yeah. So anything that's part of the good can't be a complement. It has to be something you consume with the good a lot. So, you know,
something that pops you like a straw.
you don't pay for a straw.
What
So
about, like when you get it made with coconut milk? Porters.
that would kind of be like, so it depends on how granular we want to get, right? So that could be a whole new market or product, or we could just say that's encompassed in the latte market. It's all kinds of latte, and those price differences aren't really, you know, people don't really, like if you can't drink milk, you're not gonna all of a sudden drink milk because it's 30 extra cents for coconut milk or almond milk or whatever, right? You know, so it's not terribly elastic. And it's also such a small part of your total income every month or every year, you know, the 20 cents or 50 cents or 80 cents, people don't really worry about it. But again, I would think that's part of it. So like, you know, like at Starbucks, they always say, hi, how are you doing today? Like, can I get you something to eat or a snack, you know, because they know you're there for coffee. So why are they going to try and sell you coffee? So they immediately start selling you food now. And that's why they have pictures of the food and the sandwiches, right? So it could be pastries. It could be a breakfast sandwich. Etc. So coffee's not the best one in terms of lots of compliments, but you know it's got a few. So if any of these decrease, if all of a sudden the breakfast sandwiches is normally like $4 or $2 at Starbucks, there's going to be an increase in demand for lattes because more people are going to go there to get the cheap sandwiches, and they're like, well, I'm already here, and I want a coffee with my sandwich, and so they're going to be buying more sandwiches or more lattes at any given price, right? At that $4 price. All right.
Which is why McDonald's will have like the deals, like $1 menu, but then you want fries.
Exactly. They used to make a loss on every double cheeseburger that they were making when the double cheeseburger was on the dollar menu. That's why it's like now $2 or something. They raised it. They dropped it off there, and I think it's like just a regular cheeseburgers on the dollar menu. But yeah, it was what we call a loss leader. So it's something that gets people in the door, but they never just buy one double cheeseburger. They buy a soda. Profit margins in soda are crazy high. You're paying for the cup, and you're paying for a tiny amount of syrup.
Yeah, we used to do that.
What's it? 3. I said 2, didn't I? I said. Oh, I won't be here tomorrow. Yeah. You're welcome.
So we used to do that at Domino's where like our $7.99 carryout deal.
Right.
We only made about 3 cents per pizza on the carryout deal.
Right.
But if people usually would order, you know, bread size, wings.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Which is why it was okay to say, hey, I can get you a $7.99 carryout deal because that's going to keep them coming back.
Right. Yes. Very good. So what are the other kinds of things that are going to increase the demand? So we had favorable change in tastes, increase in the price of a substitute, decrease in the price of a complement. What about if the number of buyers increases, right? So, oops, sorry. Buyers increases. So this could be, you know, the population has just grown. Or it could be that areas that you're able to provide the service or the good has grown, right? And so just the number of buyers. So, you know, this could be the population of an area, or it could be an increase in the, you know, what we call the market penetration. By a particular market.
So, in Spearfish, our McDonald's is directly across the school. So when the school year starts up, they start getting a lot more sales because all the kids can walk over there and wait, you know,
Right.
and get fries and drinks.
And it's not that their tastes and preferences have changed. It's not that anything else has changed, but we still see a rightward shift in that demand curve because there's just a greater number of buyers there. Very good. Yeah, that's a great example. So now we have to talk about normal goods and inferior goods, okay? So let's kind of take a break for a second from this list. Let's do a little breakout box. So what's a normal good? A normal good is when my income increases, my demand increases. I buy more of that. So most of the goods that we buy are normal goods, right? Lattes, you know, housing, education, video games, entertainment, clothes, right? As our income increases, we buy more of it. But there's other types of goods out there. There's not just normal goods. So the other type of good is an inferior good. Now, this isn't that the inferior good is of worse quality or something like that, right? It's the fact that when my income increases, my demand goes down for an inferior good. And so these are bus passes. This is ramen noodles. This is peanut butter and jelly. Store brand anything, exactly. So as your income increases, you start buying the brand name Jif instead of the great value peanut butter because it tastes better. So any questions on those definitions of normal and inferior goods? So it's defined by the consumption patterns of the public, right? So like I said, bus passes, here, let's just do bus passes, ramen, and store-bought anything, store brand stuff. One of the things that I would say, so there's a caveat to this in terms of there's still a lot of people that will buy like store brand aspirin and things like that, even though they're millionaires, you know? So a lot of people, they might not buy the store brand food, but they'll buy the store brand medicine because they're equivalently the same. But there have been a couple scandals in terms of safety standards and sanitary standards in the Chinese factories that are usually making the great value nasal spray or stuff like that, right? So they're equivalent, but are they as safe as something pushed out by Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble or one of these huge, large multinational corporations, you know? It's to be debated. So now that we've got those definitions down, we can keep going. So E is going to be rising income if the product is a normal good. Yeah, helpful if you could see. Rising, focus. Income if normal good. And then, obviously, it's going to be falling incomes if it's an inferior good. Does that make sense to everybody? So since our good is a normal good, the lattes, right? Rising incomes are going to mean more lattes sold. If instead our good was ramen noodles, then a rising income would have a downward shift in it. So I guess so if our product's ramen noodles and everybody's getting poorer, then there's going to be more ramen noodles bought. And then our last one, which is probably the trickiest, is expectations. So if consumers expect higher future prices for the good of interest or for their incomes, when the good is normal, then demand will increase. So the big one here is, gasoline before a hurricane or bottled water before emergencies. Does that make sense to everybody? So everyone's going to rush to the store, fill their gas tanks, fill extra gas cans, buy as much bottled water as they can from Sam's. People will just like buy all the 2x4s from Home Depot and stuff. Like I lived in Florida when we had like a bunch of hurricanes, and people just kind of go crazy a little bit, just in a buying frenzy because they're worried. No, they don't.
But shouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but there's a long gap between what people should do and what they actually do. Right?
It's always been weird to me how people rush to the store before blizzards and stuff.
Right.
Like, we kept canned food in the cupboard in case we got not when we're gonna get snowed in, panic. Right.
And so it's actually really funny because it's a cultural thing, and so I know this from some personal friends of mine. So part of, I don't want to get in trouble here, but part of the Mormon religion, as I understand it, is you have to have so much food, like in case of end times. And so they have like cellars full of all this, stored, shelf stable food. And so when the Great Recession hit and a bunch of people, lost their jobs and stuff like that, a lot of the Mormon population was okay because they had all this extra food to use. Yeah.
The Mormon Church actually owns the largest ranch in the United States, and they have
and a bunch of grocery stores.
A whole bunch of grocery stores. They own the actual ranch. They own the feedlot. They have a deal with the car deal that actually processes all their beef, so they have their own
Wow.
Is that a white animal?
No, desert ranch. It's like 40,000 cows in Florida, and they have
That's insane. Yeah, I knew that they were large. Like Albertsons, I think they owned.
they make money off that, insane money off the ranch.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Good investment for sure. Okay, the last thing we need to know, last thing I really need to focus on here is all of these things, A through G, are going to shift. So all of these shift demand outwards, right? And that we could think about that also as an increase in demand. When we think of an increase in demand, it's really that we're shifting it outwards. What students do all the time that I really need to warn you guys about is they will conflate, they'll confuse and think that these two things are the same. change in the quantity demanded, right? So a change in the quantity demanded is a movement along the demand curve. We go from, when the price goes from $4 to $2, there's a change in the quantity demanded from 4 units to 6 units. So that's a change in the quantity demanded. A change in demand is when there's an actual shift in the demand. And you can only say this if one of the A through G is happening. So I always tell students, think about it like A through G are different buckets, right? And if you can't place, whatever's in the prompt of your homework or the test in one of those buckets, it's not a change in demand. Okay? So remember, a change in the price leads to a change in quantity demanded. A change in the buyers, the price of complementary goods, the price of substitute goods, the incomes for normal goods, incomes for inferior goods, and expectations, any of those things, that's going to have a shift in the actual demand curve. Does that make sense? So at any given price, so here the price isn't changing, but now there's going to be 12 demanded instead of 4. Does that make sense to everybody? It's really easy to get those two confused and think they're the same thing. So I just need to make sure that that's clear. Okay, awesome. Moving on to supply. So supply, this is B, law of supply. And essentially producers produce and sell more at a higher price than at a lower price. Pretty simple. They're incentivized to get their butt in gear and produce more stuff when the price is higher, right? So the other way to say this there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. And so essentially, the costs don't really change that much. So higher price means higher profits. So how do we graph the supply curve? Well, remember, we use the alphabet as our mnemonic to figure out that P goes before Q. And then it's a direct relationship, right? As the price goes higher, there's going to be more quantity supply. That's our supply curve. It has a positive slope, right? Remember, demand is downward sloping, has a negative slope. Supply is upward sloping with a positive slope. So, just like with demand, we have determinants of supply that are going to shift supply out.
Like milk for our latte.
Like milk for the lattes, exactly. So, let's jump right in. Everybody got this? So, resource prices. So that's our first one. So if milk is cheaper, there's going to be an increase in the supply, right? Which, again, what does that mean, increase in supply? That means we're shifting the supply curve rightwards. So the supply curve is really easy to kind of mess up because since it's upward sloping, sometimes people think an upward shift in supply is this. It's not. That's wrong. That's why I really want you guys to start thinking about shifting stuff to the right or to the left. Okay? So the correct way, if milk is cheaper, what happens to supply? It's going to increase. And so it's a shift outwards of supply. That's correct. What about technology? What if, baristas, you don't need baristas anymore. No need for a human operator, right? Well, that's going to shift the supply outwards as well. So as technology becomes more efficient, there's going to be a rightward shift in supply. Does that make sense to everybody? No? Yes? If there's better technology, or we could even think, so maybe not no need for baristas. What about, they can make coffees 3 times as fast with a new machine? Maybe you still need a barista, but it's just super fast. You're still going to have an outward shift in the supply. At any given price, at that $4 mark,
Because you can put out more product.
exactly. You can put out more product for a given budget of what you're paying your workers. So at any given price, instead of supplying 11 lattes, we're going to supply 20 lattes per day. Whatever. So the next one that we have is good old Uncle Scam. So taxes and subsidies, right? So a business tax will shift the supply to the left because it becomes more expensive to provide that good to the person. So at any given price, at that $4 mark, instead of providing 11, now you're only going to provide 9. So business tax shifts supply down, and a business subsidy is going to shift supply up. So a subsidy is essentially the government, it's an opposite of a tax. So the government will give you some money for every sale that you make of that, right? So, the one that we've seen in the last 10 years has been solar panels, right? There's been a lot of different subsidies for solar panels. And so as a result, the original supply curve was maybe right here, and now it's over here.
Or corn and soy or something.
Yes, exactly. But that has to do with they don't want a surplus of the goods that's going to drive the price down and put, so essentially they buy up all the extra corn and they store it, right? We have giant vats of corn and other kind of vegetables. Sometimes we pay people just not to grow it too, just because the market can't handle it. And so we'll pay them to leave the ground fallow. If it's like you've always planted that, they'll say, hey, take a year off, we'll give you the money that you would get from the market price of this. So that it gets a bit more involved when we talk about ag policy, but very interesting, sure. So what about the price of related goods? So the price of related goods doesn't just affect demand, it affects supply as well. This is probably the hardest one. So this is the fact that if the price of a substitute production good, so bear with me, if the price of a substitute production good increases, then producers might shift production towards that other good.
This was the volleyball and basketball.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, all of those kind of balls, it's the same type of factory that can make them. And so if the price of one of those, you know, if the price of the volleyball increases and the price of the basketball stays the same, the basketball manufacturer may just say, well, I'm going to make volleyballs instead. It costs me just as much, but the price would be higher. And so I get more of a profit, right? And so again, what are we seeing here? We're seeing that invisible hand, right? That how prices are influencing people's decisions of what and how much to produce. It's not the government or a central authority saying, you need to produce 2 million shoes for me this year. It's the individual producer that's trying to maximize the amount of profit he or she can get by picking the good with the highest price and, you know, usually the lowest cost, right? That's the rationale. So we've got two more here, two more. Bear with me. So E, expectations. So if they expect the future price to increase, they may reduce supply in anticipation of that. They may just make stuff and hold it in a warehouse, right? Of higher prices in the future. So, you know, this might be like a graphics card, you know, producer that, you know, instead of pushing the latest graphics card out, they wait for a game release or something like that, or they wait for the price of Bitcoin or digital currencies to skyrocket again. So there's a huge demand for these graphic cards because those are the main things that they use to mine Bitcoin. And so if you expect the price of your good to increase in the future, why would you sell it right now for a smaller profit margin when you can just wait and sell it for more money? So this is why, so this right here, this is why there's anti-gouging laws, right? So if you buy all of the water from Sam's Club during a hurricane and you start selling it to people for $5 a bottle, somebody can get you in deep crap for that. It's very illegal. It's great.
That was like the beans when they first came out.
So that's different because that's not a like a necessary good. You know what I mean? So and Andrew was talking the other day about concert tickets, right? And about how you can buy the concert tickets for face value, hold on to them, and then sell them online for 2 or 3 times the price. So again, that's technically price gouging, but it's not really illegal because it's not like somebody's not going to be able to live without that. Does that make sense? So water and food and sandbags, right? You know, with hurricanes, sandbags are huge. You know, so people will go and buy all of them up and then kind of wait for the shit to hit the fan and then start selling them on the street for $5 a bottle or $50 a sandbag. And they make really good money until, you know, the cops come and say, you know, what are you doing? You don't have a seller's permit. You know, let me take a look at your, you know, and so number one, they're price gouging. And number two, they're not paying any taxes on the sales of these goods too. So they'd be doubly in trouble. And then the last one is pretty easy. It's the number of sellers. So again, just in the same way, this would be, this would be Pete's lattes. This would be Sandy's lattes. If we add them up, we get the market demand curve for lattes. It's the same kind of horizontal summation as with the demand curves. And so what does that mean? That means that if there's another supplier that comes in, right? If all of a sudden now we have Pete plus Sandy plus Edward, then there's going to be a shift out in terms of the supply curve.
Is that happening right now because we have Bean Broker, Daylight, and Peters?
Exactly. And so that's a very good example, and we'll use that for putting our demand and supply together. Because at the end of the day, why are we learning all this crap, Chris? Why are we doing this? Why are we having to draw all these, L's and then put a slash through it going either up or down? Well, at the end of the day, it's so that we can try and predict the movements of price and quantity based on certain events. Okay? So that's a very good segue into putting it all together. Good. So, put it all together. So we have price, quantity. We've got a downward sloping demand curve, and we have an upward sloping supply curve. And so where these two meet, that's the price that what we say clears the market. So P star is the price that clears the market. What do I mean by clears the market? Well, I mean that there's no goods supplied that are not purchased. And there are no goods demanded that are not sold. So in other words, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So the equilibrium price is the only price where everything that's bought is everything that people want to purchase is there, and everything that people want to sell is purchased.
In real world, that doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen that often, right? So we usually have a situation where the price is a little bit above or a little bit below that equilibrium price, right? And so we'll talk about that right now. So what would happen? We'll start a new page once everybody's done copying. What would happen if the price was too high? I want you to think about that on your own. What would happen if the price is too high?
Demand goes down.
Nope. The demand only goes down when there's a shift in the demand. So here, let's graph it. So we've got price, quantity, got downward sloping demand, got upward sloping supply. And now we're not going to have it at P star, we're going to have it at P high. So at P high, all we do is we reflect that price off of the demand curve, just like if it was a mirror, and then we reflect it off of the supply curve. And so we can just make up numbers here, right? We can just say, okay, at P high, the demand is only going to be 7, and the supply is going to be 13. So if there's 13 supplied, but only 7 demanded, then what do we call this area right here? A surplus. Very good. Jacob? What's your name? Brock. Very good, Brock. And so what happens when there's a surplus? So companies can't just stay at a surplus forever, right? And so what's happening in this, so since this is happening to the market, we can assume that this is happening to most of the companies as well. And surpluses cost money. You got to pay for a warehouse to put the stuff. You got to pay for like a tracking system for it. You have to pay to air condition it or cool it. Sometimes it's non-durable, so it's going to spoil, right? Even if it's non-durable, even if it's an electronic piece, it could be a Blu-ray player. Nobody wants a Blu-ray player anymore. They want a 4K player, right? And so if you didn't sell all your Blu-ray players in the last 10 years, you're kind of SOL. There's not a lot to do with that now.
Wouldn't sellers just discount them?
Exactly. So that's what's going to happen. This price is going to decrease. So there's going to be movements along the supply and the demand curve as the price decreases until we hit that equilibrium. Until we get to that equilibrium price. And in reality, you may end up, saying flash sale, 30% off, and you could end up overshooting this, right? And you could end up actually dropping the price so low that you're below the equilibrium. And then you have to increase the price. You know what I mean? So a lot of companies will kind of yo-yo around the equilibrium, right? It is a point that we say markets tend towards. So what do I mean by tend towards? That means that they kind of gravitate towards that equilibrium point. Okay? But it's not necessarily that indicative of reality. So what happens if they sell, or if they set that price too low? If they set that price too low, then we end up getting a supply that's very low and a demand that's larger, right? So again, we just do a reflection off of this supply, just like it's a mirror, and we'd say, okay, that looks like 5 units. And then we do a reflection off the demand, and again, I'm just making these numbers up, right? This is going to be 11 units. So the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, which means we have a what? A shortage. Very good. And so this is what we see often happens when there's a new release of a video game console, right? The Switch, the Wii, they kind of set the price so low and there's such a lot of demand for it, but they end up not being able to produce enough at that price. Part of that is because just like the double cheeseburger, the consoles, I know Microsoft loses money every time they sell an Xbox One. Why are they doing it then? Because they get a lot of money every time you buy an Xbox game. And so it's a loss leader for the games. You can't, what the point is, nobody's gonna buy an Xbox One without buying video games and controllers and accessories and things like that, right? So that's where they get you. But the actual Xbox, in terms of what it costs them to put all that hardware in there, it's more than what we're paying for. So that's why there's usually a shortage when those things come out. So let's, as our last thing, because we're about out of time, and what I'll do, I think, I'm gonna leave the Learn Smarts to be due, but I'll change the quizzes, because right now I think you have 3 quizzes this week, and we've only gotten through chapter 3 really, so I'll push chapter 4 and chapter 5 quizzes until next week. Give everybody a little bit of an easier 3-day weekend. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, still do the Learn Smarts for me, but I'll push the 4 and 5, put them in week 3, and they'll be due on the 8th. So the last thing, let's do an application of this with the coffee. So Chadron lattes, right? So not regular coffee, fancy coffees. And so we've got a downward sloping demand curve, and we've got a upward sloping supply curve. I forgot to label my axes, price, quantity, awesome. So remember on the test, you need to have so the arrows are really important on the axes. They technically should also be on the curves, but I'm not going to penalize you if there's no arrows on the curves since I almost never do them. You have to label price and quantity on each axis. That's a point each. And you have to label the demand and the supply curve. Those are another 2 points. So you end up getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, or 6, and then you have to title it. You get 6 points just for the set. Does that make sense? Just trying to make that clear. These are all the necessary components. Okay, so now now the prompt will say, there is a new coffee shop opening up. What can you expect to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity? So, new coffee shop opening up, is that a shifter in the demand or the supply? Supply, right? It's going to be number of sellers. So first of all, we need to figure out which. So the first thing we do is we say demand or supply. We say it's supply. And then we say which factor. And we would say number of sellers. And then how is it going to shift supply? Is it going to shift it out or in? It's going to shift it out. Very good. And so S2, S1. So we had an old equilibrium price and quantity that was right here, P star, Q star. Now we have a new equilibrium price and quantity. We can call it P double star, Q double star. And what happens? We see that the quantity increases and the price decreases. And so if you have a shift, you have to either label them very clearly, right? That you could, so how else could you label it? You could say this is P1 and P2 if you want. I like the stars though. The stars really tell us their equilibriums, not just random amounts. So you either have to label it like that or you have to have an arrow that clearly shows what's, so I'm doing both right here, but I'm kind of being redundant. Does that make sense? You only need one of them to get full credit. And so we know that the price is going to go down and the quantity is going to go up. And that's our answer. Any questions? All right, we'll start in class on Tuesday with a couple more examples of supply and demand shifters, and then we'll jump into elasticity and hopefully get through chapters 4 and 5 next week, probably push 6 to the week afterwards. So we're a little behind, but that's fine. I'd rather you guys be asking questions and understanding the stuff than us just driving through the material. Have a great 3-day, 4-day weekend. Please let me know if you have any questions, if you have any problems, send me screenshots, send me page numbers and questions. You know, I'll make videos, I'll help you guys out. Yeah, let me know though.
Tuesday, you want to run it again?
Yeah, man.
I got very disappointed in how it went down.
I'm not, it was awesome.
Whoa.